This is a Mexican movie set in a town torn apart by the drug war. And it starts with all these numbers and statistics about the death toll. And about how many people and children go missing or just disappear. Or end up basically as orphans as a result of the cartel activities. And the movie follows this young girl whose mom goes missing, which leads her to ending up on the street with this group of other kids. And it's essentially a story about the effects of this drug war on its unintended victims, the children, who basically end up as collateral damage and end up wrapped up in it unwillingly. Meanwhile, they're still kids, and despite the dire circumstances, they still try to make the best out of the terrible situation. They still run around having fun, playing and doing whatever kids like to do. Now, the tone of the movie and how it was all put together and handled was very interesting. Because it is essentially sort of a horror movie. It definitely has some strong horror elements to it. There's some creepy stuff in there that's surprisingly effective too. But it sort of mixes in some more fantastical elements as well, in the form of both 3D and 2D animation, which I thought was an interesting approach. And some of it definitely worked, however, some of it I wasn't that convinced by. And here's the thing too, you're never really sure if some of these things are actually real or just in the imagination of these kids. You know, is it all real or all imagined, or a mix of the two? The lines get a bit blurry. And then there's the stuff that's a bit more grounded in reality. The death and violence in the environment, which is actually the real horror here. Especially when you realize that these kind of places actually exist. And there are tons of kids out there who are forced to live in these kind of conditions. But you know, movies like this, told from the perspective of kids, can oftentimes feel a bit silly, especially when you mix in some of those fantasy elements. However, this one definitely didn't feel silly to me, quite the opposite. Because it genuinely got to me on an emotional level. Because in a lot of ways it's pretty grim and sad actually. And I definitely felt for these kids, and they were pretty good too as far as the acting goes. That's another pitfall with movies that focus on a group of kids. Especially when they're supposed to show some nuance and real emotional range. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that they were excellent, I have seen better. The movie Capernaum comes to mind. However, they definitely did a good enough job and managed to get me invested. They weren't really impeding the effectiveness of the movie. And you know what? Despite of how grim and dark this movie could be at times, by the end of it, it was actually kinda touching, beautiful even. And I think they did a really good job with how it all wrapped up. Speaking of which, this is actually a very short movie too. I mean, without the credits, I think it clocked in at around an hour 17 minutes. And it definitely doesn't waste any of that time either. It's very concise and to the point. It doesn't dilly-dally or bloat the runtime with unnecessary nonsense. It's just very efficient, which is something I personally always appreciate. So overall, I thought this was a pretty good movie, no major complaints from me. Even the more technical side of things was handled very competently. However, would I recommend this? Sure, why not? So maybe check it out. Or don't, after all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic. And if you'd like, you can also support me on Patreon or PayPal through the links in the description. And as always, I appreciate you and thanks for watching.